Well, I'm sure most everybody's talking about the uh, terrible, no good, very bad Christmas parade in Waukesha, Wisconsin. But I'm not going to talk about that today because guess what? We got big Fed news. Joe Biden has just announced that Jerome Powell will be sticking around for another 4 years as a Fed chair. And I thought at first when I heard this news that that would make Powell the first bipartisan, renominated Fed chair since Greenspan, but actually Bernanke was renominated by Obama. I hadn't remembered that. It was only after Bernanke served 2 full terms, of course, in very major scare quotes, that Obama appointed Yellen. And then when Yellen's term was up, Trump did not reappoint her. And so Powell, to my knowledge, he's the one, big name of the Trump administration who has stuck around. Although I guess technically the Fed doesn't like to consider themselves to be a part of the administration. They are. The Fed chair is appointed by the president. So, really hard to divorce the Fed from the White House. Now, there have been some rumblings that old Jerome Powell was not going to be long for this world, or at least not long for the world of Fed chairmanships. But I guess he has done a good enough job being an ultra dove for old Uncle Joe to keep him around. And honestly, this doesn't surprise me. Powell, I don't know what more Powell could have done to be an ultra dove, to, give a blank check to the federal government. I mean, really, Joe Biden can spend as much money as he wants. Jerome Powell is going to cash those checks. It's just a matter of whether or not Congress is willing to endorse them. If you want to think about this in a simplified way, that's kind of how this works. Joe Biden writes the check, Congress has to endorse the check, and then Jerome Powell cashes the check. That is the debt monetization scheme in a nutshell. And Jay Powell made it clear. Any checks that the president wants to write, he's good for it. But Congress has to sign off too. And so Joe Biden has no real reason to have any sort of a beef with Powell and to want anybody else in there. Other than, I guess you could say, well, Powell was appointed by Trump, so he must be bad. In the case of the Fed, people don't even really pretend to think that. People in Washington understand that the Fed is so fundamentally corrupt and evil that not even a Trump appointee to the Fed could be a bad guy in their eyes. Jerome Powell is fundamentally a member of the club, the big club, the one that George Carlin used to talk about. And so being appointed by Donald Trump does not sully his membership in the club, because actions speak louder than words. And at the end of the day, Jay Powell always comes around to save the stock market, to do whatever he thinks he can do in his power, even if he overestimates his own power, even if the Fed doesn't have as tight of control over the bond market as they believe, or as they would like other people to believe. At the end of the day, there's nothing much more that our power elite could ask from a Fed chair than what Powell has delivered. And so what that means is that he has been a terrible Fed chairman for just about everyone else in the country. He's tried to fashion himself as the Maestro 2.0, defeating the business cycle and ensuring a perpetual bull market in stocks, when in reality what normal people want, despite what, or I shouldn't say want, because they don't necessarily understand the ins and outs of how interest rates work and the impact it has on the economy, but the right thing to do for the average American who doesn't own stocks would be to raise interest rates, to bring down the prices of housing, for example, to disregard what's going on in the stock market, to stop blowing our current everything bubble bigger and bigger. Because when there's a bubble in everything, well, all of a sudden, everything becomes unaffordable. And honestly, just from a pure Machiavellian standpoint, Jerome Powell has been able to defeat the business cycle for the duration of his 4-year term. If I were him, I would want to retire with this sterling record, just like, what's her name, Janet Yellen did, and let everything collapse after I leave. But unfortunately, whoever would have replaced Powell, likely Brainerd, would have been, it's hard for me to imagine how this is possible, but even more dovish. And so they would not have allowed things to start to unwind, in the way that they did in the lead up to 2008. They would not have raised interest rates. They would not have initiated the much needed correction. They would have, just like Powell is going to continue doing now, continue full steam ahead. And so what does it matter at the end of the day? I mean, it matters for Powell's ego. That's for certain. If Powell had been fired, it would make him feel bad. He would say, gee, Wally, didn't I do a good job? Why would Uncle Joe not want me around anymore? But other than that, I don't think anything really would be different. And so, maybe this doesn't matter. Maybe, all this stuff about, infighting at the Fed to the extent that it ever takes place, the stories about insider trading over the last few months. What does it all really matter? Because even if you got rid of any of the individual people at the Fed, the overall direction of the institution, the course would not be altered. It's not like we're going to get, the ghost of Murray Rothbard in his Fed chair. You're not even going to get somebody like that on the board of the Fed. You're not even going to get a Hayekian, a moderate social democrat. Those people are way too, right wing and hawkish for the Federal Reserve, even to be on the board. The right wing, if you want to call it that, of the Federal Reserve System are the monetarists, and they're not great. Not when it comes to money. The one thing that the monetarists specialize in is the one area in which they have the worst opinions. That's how people tend to be. They're the most passionate about what they're the most, I don't want to say ill-informed about, because I don't want to act like monetarists are unintelligent people. Although, you could say something like that when it comes to somebody like Bernie Sanders. The one thing he's most passionate about, economics, is the one thing that he is absolutely the worst on, and catastrophic. Although, he's far more catastrophically wrong about economics than monetarists are catastrophically wrong about monetary theory. Monetarists, I do think, make good points and things. It's just when you get into the weeds, that's when I start jumping off the boat. Now, moving forward, what's something positive? I want to end on a high note today. Are things just going to continue like they have been for the entirety of Powell's term and Yellen's term before that, where we just have this sort of meandering malaise, where we have chronically low interest rates, where saving money is penalized when you have effectively negative interest rates, where housing prices, are to the moon? Is this going to continue? Frankly, I don't know. Bond yields would tend to suggest no. But what's the timetable on that look like? And, how long is that going to take? The housing market last time, after the bubble popped in 2006, I don't think a lot of people realize, it took till 2012, a full 6 years later, for the market to bottom out. Sure, stocks drop a lot quicker than that, but stocks are not something you have to own in order to live. You do need a house or an apartment or a condo or something like that. You need somewhere to live. And the decline hasn't even begun. And keep in mind, in much of the country, prices now, in areas of the country in which there was a bubble last time, the bubble this time is way bigger than it was back in 2005. And the Fed is not very sensitive to that, since none of them have any trouble dealing with higher housing costs, since they are so unspeakably wealthy. You know, they're far beyond the 1%. You know, they're the 1% of the 1%. And so they don't really, it doesn't really click with them that housing prices, again, you've got all the other, I'm not even touching the other inflation. You've got inflation, you know, across the board. But housing is where it has been very bad for a very long time now. And I mean that compared to the historical average, because historically housing prices do not rise. They're flat and they move, you know, with inflation, meaning that in real terms housing prices don't go up. But ever since the bottom in 2006 or 2012, and the bottom, by the way, just got down to the historical average. It got back down to normal. Then the housing bubble exploded again after that. We've been on a new housing bubble for the last 9 years. The price of housing relative to the value of the dollar is higher now than it's ever been. It's much, much higher than 06. And so once we even begin the path of unwinding this, it's going to take many, many years, perhaps a whole nother decade, to get back down to where prices are normal. And so what does that do to a society? We've not had a period in American history where housing, you know, the most basic of basic needs, was that unaffordable for that long. The old housing bubble, if you remember correctly, technically you could say it started about 98, but it really kicked off after 9/11. In fact, Paul Krugman wrote a rather hilarious article in retrospect. You know, we need a housing bubble to replace the tech bubble, or the dot-com bubble, which had burst around 2000, 2001, I believe. And so that lasted about 5-6 years, the housing bubble, before it burst and then started to puke. But this housing bubble, this second housing bubble, has lasted a decade already, and who knows how long it'll take to unwind. Now, maybe the bigger they are, the harder they fall, and the prices will fall more rapidly this time than last time around. But remember, in 05, 06, around there, whatever, the Fed was instigating the collapse. The Fed was raising interest rates. The Fed had never even uttered the words quantitative easing. They had never even thought about it. Well, they had thought about it. They had written papers about it. But they had never, you know, there was no quantitative easing back then. The Fed wasn't out buying assets. And interest rates were way above zero. But, you know, Jerome Powell, since he's sticking around, he's not going to be raising rates. It's not in him. You know, even if he finally concedes that inflation isn't transitory, I don't see him raising rates. I hope I'm wrong, but even if Powell did raise rates, the reaction in equity markets would be so severe that he would flip-flop, just like he did last time. I maintain throughout the entire time that I've been doing this channel that the real crash began in fall of 2018. And Powell stopped it. He slammed on the brakes, and he wouldn't let it happen. And so, until you get somebody in there who is not that kind of a pathological bubbletarian, I don't know how you fix this. Hopefully, so much pressure builds that, you know, even the will of the Fed chair is not enough to keep it back. Certainly, there are people like Jeff Snyder who firmly believe that the Fed is a paper tiger and that the Fed cannot, you know, hold back the dam, and that bond yields are forecasting that the Fed is going to be unable to raise rates and to promote growth. So, yeah, I don't think we've I don't think that this is going to be a very monumental day in retrospect. So with that said, I will see you folks back here tomorrow.